The fluorescent lights of the late-night café hummed softly, casting long shadows across the empty tables. Cynthia wiped down the counter for the third time that evening, her movements automatic after 5 years of working the graveyard shift. Outside, the streets of downtown Los Angeles were quiet, that eerie kind of silence that settled over the city between midnight and dawn, when even the criminals seemed to take a break. She glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. 3 more hours until her shift ended. Cynthia had always preferred the night shift. Fewer customers meant fewer questions, fewer curious looks, fewer people wondering why a 28-year-old woman was still working minimum wage at a cafe instead of building some impressive career. The night shift let her disappear into routine, letting her exist without explanation. But tonight felt different. A tension hung in the air that she couldn't quite name, a prickling at the back of her neck that she'd learned to trust over the years. The door chimed. Before we continue, can I ask you a question? Where in the world are you watching from? Comment below because we'd love to know how far these stories travel, and hit that subscribe button because we're about to go on a ride. Now let's continue. Cynthia looked up, her hand instinctively moving toward the baseball bat she kept hidden behind the counter. But what stumbled through the door wasn't a threat. It was a child. A little boy, no more than 6 years old, practically collapsed onto the cafe floor. His clothes were dirty, his small face streaked with tears and grime. His eyes, wide and terrified, darted around the room like a cornered animal searching for predators. "Oh my God," Cynthia breathed, rushing around the counter. She knelt beside him, careful not to touch him yet, not wanting to startle him further. "Hey, sweetheart. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now." The boy's chest heaved with ragged breaths. He looked at her with those enormous dark eyes, and something in Cynthia's chest cracked open, a wound she'd spent 20 years trying to seal. David. For just a moment, her thoughts trailed off. It felt like this wasn't a random child in her cafe. Like this was her little brother, 8 years old, being dragged away from the orphanage by men in dark clothes while she screamed and fought against the matron's iron grip. This was exactly David's terrified face looking back at her one last time before disappearing around the corner, gone forever. Cynthia blinked hard, forcing herself back to the present. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. The boy shook his head, but his body trembled violently. "Are you hungry?" A small nod. Okay. Let me get you something to eat. Can you sit in that booth right there?" She pointed to the corner booth, the one hidden from the street view. Some instinct told her to keep him out of sight. The boy stumbled to the booth, climbing onto the vinyl seat. Cynthia moved quickly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She heated up leftover pasta from the kitchen, poured a glass of chocolate milk, and grabbed some cookies from the display case. When she set the food in front of him, his eyes went wide. "It's all yours," she said gently, sliding into the seat across from him. "Take your time." He ate like he hadn't seen food in days, desperate, messy, barely chewing. Cynthia's jaw tightened. Whatever had happened to this child, it was bad, really bad. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy paused mid-bite, looking at her with those haunted eyes. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He tried again, managing only a whisper. "June. June," Cynthia repeated softly. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Cynthia. Can you tell me what happened? How did you get here?" June's small hands clenched around his fork. His eyes filled with fresh tears. "It's okay," Cynthia said quickly. "You don't have to tell me. You're safe now. I promise." But even as she said it, that prickling sensation at the back of her neck intensified. She glanced toward the cafe's front windows, scanning the dark street outside. Nothing. Just shadows and streetlights. "June, is there someone I can call? Your parents? Someone who's looking for you?" She asked him, but he shook his head frantically, his whole body going rigid with fear. Okay. No calling anyone. It's fine." Cynthia kept her voice calm and soothing. Inside, her mind raced. A child this young, this terrified, alone in the middle of the night. Something was very wrong. She thought about calling the police. That looked like the most logical thing to do, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way June looked at her with desperate trust, like she was his only lifeline. Or maybe it was her own history with authorities who'd promised to help and failed spectacularly. Maybe it was just instinct. Whatever it was, Cynthia decided to trust it. All right, June, here's what we're going to do. You're going to finish eating, and then... The door chimed again. Cynthia's head snapped up. Two men walked into the cafe, and every alarm bell in her body started screaming. They were big, not just tall, but built like people who hurt others for a living. Both wore dark clothes, leather jackets despite the warm night. One had a snake tattoo crawling up his neck. The other had a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Their eyes swept the cafe with predatory precision. June made a small, terrified sound. Before Cynthia could react, he'd slipped out of the booth and pressed himself against her legs, his small hands clutching the fabric of her jeans. The two men's gazes locked onto them. Well, Snake Tattoo said, his voice rough as gravel. There's the little brat. Cynthia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face neutral. Calm. She'd learned a long time ago that predators could smell fear. I'm sorry, but we're closed, she said evenly. You'll have to come back tomorrow. Scarface laughed, a harsh and ugly sound. We're not here for coffee, sweetheart. We're here for the kid. What kid? Cynthia asked, even as June pressed harder against her legs. Don't play stupid. Snake Tattoo took a step forward. That's valuable merchandise you're hiding behind you. Hand him over, and we'll forget we saw you. Behind her back, Cynthia's hand found June's small shoulder, squeezed once. She felt him trembling. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward, putting herself between the men and the child. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice dropping into a register she hadn't used in years. The one from the south side, from the streets, from before she'd learned to make herself small and invisible. But I think you need to leave. Now. The two men exchanged glances. Then they both smiled. See, that's not going to work, Scarface said, moving toward the counter, trying to flank her. We've been looking for that kid all night. It took us hours to track him here. You really think we're just going to walk away? Snake Tattoo pulled something from his jacket, a knife, long and gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Last chance, bitch. Give us the kid. Cynthia didn't move. She couldn't move because June had wrapped his arms around her leg now, and she could feel his whole body shaking against her. She looked down at him, saw his face pressed against her side, and heard him whisper just loud enough for her to catch it. Bad men. Those two words, spoken in a child's terrified voice, unlocked something inside her that she'd kept buried for 20 years. A rage so pure and white-hot that it burned away every other thought. These men had hurt this child, had probably kidnapped him, and were planning to take him back to whatever hell he'd escaped from. Not this time. Something fierce inside her snarled. Not ever again. June, she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the two men. Remember that booth you were sitting in? I need you to hide under the table. Don't come out until I tell you. Understand? But go. Now, she instructed with urgency. She felt him hesitate for just a moment. Then his arms released her leg. She heard the soft scuffle of his feet as he scrambled back to the booth. Snake Tattoo laughed again. Oh, so you think you're going to stop us? You? Look at you. You're what, 120 pounds soaking wet. Cynthia rolled her shoulders, loosening the muscles she kept so carefully controlled for so long. Her martial arts instructor's voice echoed in her memory. Size doesn't matter if you know where to strike. Speed and precision beats strength every time. I'm 135 pounds, she corrected calmly. And you're right. I can't stop both of you. The men relaxed slightly, thinking they'd won. But I can hurt you badly enough that you'll wish you'd left when I asked. What happened next happened fast. Scarface lunged for her first, probably thinking his size would intimidate her into freezing. It was his mistake. Cynthia sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing face first into the counter. The impact was brutal. She heard something crunch, probably his nose. He went down hard. Snake Tattoo moved immediately, bringing the knife up in a wide slash aimed at her midsection. But Cynthia had been training for this exact scenario since she was 10 years old. She'd made her brother's kidnapping mean something, had turned her helplessness into purpose, her grief into skill. She dropped low, swept his legs. As he stumbled, she struck, palm heel to the solar plexus, knee to the groin, elbow to the temple as he doubled over. Each hit was precise, calculated, years of training compressing into seconds of controlled violence. If you're shocked by Cynthia's bravery, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in her situation. Your support means everything. Now let's dive back into this amazing story. The knife in his hand clattered to the floor. Behind her, Scarface was struggling to his feet, blood streaming from his broken nose. Cynthia spun, grabbed the coffee pot from the warmer, still hot from an hour ago, and threw the pot into his face. The coffee pot shattered against Scarface's face. Cynthia couldn't afford to think, as the scalding liquid splashed across his skin and he screamed, stumbling backward. Snake Tattoo, obviously in severe pain, but refusing to back down, got up with his knife again, his face twisted with rage. Cynthia glared at him. She had spent years preparing for exactly this moment, though she'd never admitted it to herself. Every punch thrown at the worn bag in Master Kim's dojo, every drill practiced until her muscles screamed, it had all been for this. For the chance to save someone when it mattered. For the chance to not be helpless. Snake Tattoo, with the knife, lunged again. Cynthia grabbed his wrist and twisted hard. She heard something else crack. Bone or cartilage, she couldn't tell, and he howled. The knife fell to the floor, sliding away. She didn't give him time to recover. Her knee drove into his solar plexus once again, harder than before. Then her elbow smashed hard into his throat, causing him to gasp as he went down hard, his head bouncing off the tile with a sickening thud. Scarface, coffee burned and furious, charged at her again, with his hands outstretched like he wanted to wrap them around her throat. "You don't give up, do you?" Cynthia muttered as she grabbed the nearest chair and swung it with everything she had. The wood connected with his skull, and he dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Silence fell over the cafe, broken only by her ragged breathing and the soft sobbing of the child under the table. Cynthia's hands trembled as adrenaline flooded her system. Two grown men with weapons and bad intentions lay unconscious on the cafe floor. She'd actually done it. The reality of it hit her like a wave, threatening to pull her under, but she forced herself to stay present, to focus. The boy. She had to think about the boy. She turned slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might scare him further. He was still pressed against the corner booth, under the table, his small body shaking, and his dark eyes wide with terror. And the way he looked at her now, like she was either his salvation or another monster, made her chest ache with recognition. "It's okay," she said softly, lowering herself to his eye level despite every instinct screaming at her to grab him and run before these men woke up or their friend arrived. "They can't hurt you now. I promise." The boy stared at her for a long moment, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then, as if something inside him finally broke, he launched himself forward and wrapped his arms around her neck with desperate strength. She felt his tears soaking through her shirt, felt his whole body convulsing with sobs, and something ancient and wounded in her own chest cracked wide open. David. God. He reminded her so much of David. "Shoo, I've got you," she whispered, standing carefully with the child in her arms. He weighed almost nothing, felt fragile as bird bones against her chest. "We need to go, okay? We need to get somewhere safe." He nodded against her shoulder, and she moved before she could second-guess herself. She grabbed her jacket from behind the counter, threw it over the boy to hide him, and slipped out the cafe's back door into the pre-dawn darkness of Los Angeles. Her apartment was only 3 blocks away, but it felt like 3 miles as she hurried through the empty streets with the boy clinging to her. Every shadow seemed threatening, every distant sound like footsteps following. She kept replaying some words in her head, but she didn't know about any of that yet. Right now, all she knew was that this child had stumbled into her cafe looking like he'd escaped from hell itself, and 2 dangerous men had called him merchandise before trying to take him back. Merchandise. The word made her sick. Her building was old, tired, The kind of place where neighbors minded their own business because everyone had something they didn't want questions about. She'd lived here for 3 years, chosen it specifically for its anonymity. Now she was grateful for that choice as she slipped inside, climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, and locked her door behind them with shaking hands. The boy finally loosened his death grip on her neck. She set him down carefully on her worn-out couch and got her first good look at him in proper light. He was beautiful in the way children often are. He had delicate features, enormous dark eyes framed by thick lashes, black hair that fell across his forehead in messy waves. Asian, definitely Korean, given the neighborhood. But it was the fear in those eyes that gutted her, the kind of bone-deep terror that came from experiencing something no child should ever have to endure. And the bruises. Now that she could see him clearly, she noticed the purple-green marks on his arms, the raw patches around his wrists that looked like rope burns. Someone had tied this child up and had held him captive. Rage flooded through her, hot and righteous and familiar. It was the same rage she'd felt at 8 years old, watching strange men drag David away while adults who should have protected them did nothing. The same rage that had driven her to Master Kim's dojo at 13, determined to never be powerless again. "Are you hungry?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay gentle despite the fury coursing through her veins. "You weren't able to eat much before those men came." The boy nodded, small and uncertain. She moved to her tiny kitchen, heated up some mac and cheese she had left, because it was quick and kids usually liked it. While the microwave hummed, she grabbed a clean towel, dampened it with warm water. When she brought both items to the couch, the boy's eyes locked onto the food with an intensity that suggested he was still very hungry. "Here," she said, setting the bowl in front of him. "Eat slowly, okay? You'll make yourself sick otherwise." He didn't listen. He attacked the food like he was still starving, his small hands trembling as he scooped the meal into his mouth. Cynthia watched him, her heart breaking with each desperate bite. "You said your name is June, right?" she asked softly. He nodded and looked up at her with cheese on his chin. "June," she repeated, committing it to memory once again. "That's a good name." June's eyes darted around her small apartment, cataloging exits, corners, places to hide. She recognized that behavior, the constant vigilance of someone who'd learned that safety was temporary, that danger could appear at any moment. She'd worn that same expression for years after David disappeared. "June, can you tell me what happened? How did you end up at my cafe?" His whole body went rigid. The fork clattered back into the bowl as his hands clenched into fists. Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks, and she immediately regretted pushing. "It's okay, you don't have to." "Bad men," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "Bad men took me. From a park. They put me in a dark room." Cynthia's breath caught. When did they take you?" "Yesterday. I think yesterday. It was daytime, and then it was dark, and then—" He trailed off, his small chest heaving with barely controlled panic. "They said they were going to call my daddy. They said they wanted something from him. A kidnapping. This was an actual kidnapping, and she just inserted herself directly into the middle of it." "How did you get away?" she asked, needing to understand the full picture, even though part of her didn't want to know, didn't want the responsibility that knowledge would bring. "They fell asleep. All of them. I was so quiet." His voice dropped even lower, like he was afraid the kidnappers might somehow hear him, even now. "I untied the ropes. It took me so long. My hands hurt." He held up his small wrists, showing her the angry red marks that would probably scar. "Then I ran. I just ran and didn't stop." "You were so brave," Cynthia told him, meaning every word. "So incredibly brave, June." "I saw the lights," he continued, his words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. "Your cafe lights. Everything else was dark, but your lights were on, and I thought maybe someone there could help. And then those men came and I thought they found me. Thought it was over, but then you—" He looked at her with awe. "You fought them. You were so strong." She wasn't strong. She was terrified and way out of her depth, and had just committed assault on 2 men who probably worked for people much worse than themselves. But she couldn't tell him that. He needed her to be strong right now. "June, is there someone I can call? Maybe someone who's looking for you." Terror flashed across his face, so intense it was almost physical. He shook his head violently, his whole body starting to shake again. No, no phone. They'll know. They'll find me. They said they were watching, that they'd know if Daddy called police, that they'd... He couldn't finish, dissolving into fresh sobs. Cynthia pulled him close and let him cry against her shoulder while her mind raced. The kidnappers had warned against police involvement, which meant they had some way of monitoring for it. Which meant these weren't amateur criminals. They were organized, connected, and dangerous. And she'd just beaten 2 of them unconscious. The smart thing would be to call the police anyway. Let professionals handle this. But she'd been through the system before, had seen how it chewed up vulnerable kids and spat them out broken. And something about June's terror when she mentioned calling anyone made her hesitate. What if the kidnappers really were monitoring emergency calls? What if involving authorities now got this child killed? Okay, she said quietly. No phone calls. Not tonight. You'll stay here where it's safe, and we'll figure out what to do in the morning. Okay. He nodded against her shoulder, his sobs gradually quieting. She held him until his breathing evened out, until the adrenaline started leaving his small body and exhaustion took its place. I need to clean you up, she said gently. Get those cuts washed. Do you think you could take a quick shower? He looked uncertain, but nodded. She led him to her tiny bathroom, found a clean t-shirt that would hang like a dress on his small frame, showed him how to work the shower. While the water ran, she stood guard outside the door, her mind spinning with implications and possibilities and fears. Those men from the cafe would wake up eventually. They'd report back to whoever hired them. They'd seen her face, could describe her, maybe even identify the cafe. How long did she have before more people came looking? Hours? Minutes? She should run. Should grab June and disappear into the city's anonymous sprawl. But where would they go? She had maybe $300 in her bank account, an old car that barely ran, no family to turn to, no resources beyond her own 2 hands. The water shut off. A few minutes later, June emerged wearing her oversized t-shirt, his hair damp and sticking up in all directions. He looked impossibly small and impossibly young, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like concrete. Better? She asked. He nodded. Thank you. For the food. For. He gestured vaguely at everything. The shower, the clothes, the safety. For everything. You don't have to thank me, June. Any decent person would help. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. Would any decent person have fought off armed men? Brought a stranger's child home instead of calling authorities? Or was she doing this for reasons that had nothing to do with decency and everything to do with the 8-year-old girl who'd failed to save her brother 20 years ago? You can sleep in my bed, she told him, pushing away the uncomfortable self-reflection. I'll take the couch. Will you stay close? His voice was so small, so afraid. I'll be right here. I promise. She settled him in a bed, tucked the blanket around his thin shoulders. He held onto the edge of her sleeve like a lifeline, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion, but fighting to stay open. Cynthia, he whispered. Yeah. Are you going to leave me? Like everyone else? The question drove a knife straight through her heart. No, hold on. I'm not going to leave you. You're safe now. He nodded, satisfied enough to finally let his eyes close. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep, though his hand never released its grip on her sleeve. Cynthia sat on the edge of the bed, watching this child she'd known for less than 3 hours, and felt her entire life tilting on its axis. She must have dozed off eventually, because the pounding on her door shocked her awake with her heart already racing. Pale morning light filtered through her window. The clock read 8:47 a.m. The pounding came again, sharp and authoritative. Not the police. She'd heard enough police knocks in her life to recognize the particular cadence. This was something else, something worse. June jerked awake beside her, his eyes going wide with renewed terror. They found me, he whispered, his voice high and thin with panic. They found me. They found me. They found me. Shoo. Cynthia pressed a finger to her lips, her mind already calculating. The apartment had only one exit. The window led to a fire escape, but they were 3 floors up and June was too small to climb down quickly. They were trapped. We're here for the boy. The voice through the door was male, deep calm. Not threatening, but not exactly friendly either. His father sent us. Cynthia's hand moved to the kitchen knife she'd placed on her nightstand before falling asleep. How do I know you're not the same people who took him? There was a pause, the sound of muffled conversation. Then came a response. The boy has a birthmark on his left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. His favorite food is kimchi fried rice, but he won't eat it if there's onions. He's afraid of thunderstorms, and he sleeps with a brown teddy bear named Honey that his father gave him when he was born. Cynthia looked at June. His face had gone pale, but expression had changed. It showed fear mixed with recognition, mixed with something that might have been hope. Do you know them? She asked quietly. June's lips trembled. That's Uncle Min's voice. He worked for my daddy. Uncle Min, is he safe? Can we trust him? June nodded slowly, uncertain but less terrified than before. He's nice. He teaches me Taekwondo. He wouldn't hurt me. Cynthia made a decision that felt both inevitable and insane. She moved to the door, hands still gripping the knife, and opened it just wide enough to see out. 6 men stood in her narrow hallway. All wore dark suits that probably cost more than her yearly rent. All had the kind of build that suggested violence was part of their job description. But their faces weren't cruel, just professional, watchful, waiting. The one in front was middle-aged with gray at his temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes swept over her defensive posture, cataloged the knife in her hand, assessed her as a threat, and dismissed her in the same breath. But there was no contempt in that dismissal, just calculation. You're the one who saved him, the man said. Not a question. I'm the one who stopped 2 men from kidnapping him, yes. Who are you? My name is Min Suk-jin. I'm head of security for Park Minho, Jun-woo's father. We've been searching for the boy all night. His eyes moved past her, finding Jun, who'd crept closer. Something in his professional mask cracked. Jun-woo, are you hurt? Uncle Min. The relief in Jun's voice was unmistakable. He started toward the door, but Cynthia stepped sideways, blocking him. Not because she didn't believe this man, but because she needed to be sure. Proof, she said flatly. Give me proof you're who you say you are. Min reached slowly into his jacket, clearly telegraphing his movements, so she wouldn't think he was going for a weapon, and pulled out a phone. He turned the screen toward her. The wallpaper showed him crouched next to a younger Jun, both of them in Taekwondo uniforms, both grinning at the camera. It could have been photoshopped, but the way Jun was straining toward this man, the genuine warmth that had entered Uncle Min's eyes when he saw the boy, those things were harder to fake. Please, Min said quietly. His father has been losing his mind for 18 hours. Just let us bring him home. Cynthia looked back at Jun, letting him make the final choice. Do you want to go with him? He nodded, then surprised her by grabbing her hand. But you have to come too. Please? I want you to meet my daddy. Every instinct told her to refuse. These men were dangerous. Not in the way the kidnappers had been dangerous, but dangerous in a more fundamental way. They moved with the confidence of people who knew they were untouchable, who operated outside normal rules. Getting involved with them beyond this moment would be a mistake. But Jun was looking at her with those big, trusting eyes, and she'd promised she wouldn't leave him. Just to make sure he gets home safe, she heard herself say, knowing it was a lie, knowing she was already in too deep to pretend otherwise. Relief crossed Min's face. Thank you. Mr. Park will want to thank you properly. I don't want thanks. I just want to know he's okay. Something shifted in Min's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Nevertheless, please this way. Cynthia grabbed her jacket, slipped on her shoes. Jun kept his hand locked in hers as they followed the men downstairs. Outside, 2 black SUVs waited at the curb, expensive and conspicuous in this rundown neighborhood. A few neighbors watched from windows and porches, but quickly looked away when the suited men glanced their direction. These people were used to being obeyed, Cynthia realized. Used to people averting their eyes and asking no questions. Uncle Min opened the door to the first SUV, gesturing for her and Jun to enter. The interior was all leather and luxury, the kind of vehicle she'd only ever seen in movies. 2 men climbed in front. Min sat across from them. The other SUV pulled out first, leading the way. Where are we going? Cynthia asked. Home, Min replied simply. They drove through Los Angeles as the city woke up, leaving behind the cramped streets for wider boulevards, then into the hills where the houses grew larger and farther apart. June had curled against her side, his earlier fear giving way to exhaustion now that he felt safe. Cynthia watched through tinted windows as neighborhoods transformed from urban density to wealthy isolation. Each mile took them further from her world and deeper into something else entirely. The men who took him, she said quietly, not wanting to wake June. Were they part of a gang? Min's jaw tightened. Jade Dragons. Small-time criminals trying to make a name for themselves by targeting Mr. Park's business interests. By kidnapping a 6-year-old? They chose poorly. The coldness in those words suggested the kidnapper's fate had already been sealed. You saved Jun Woo from something very bad. Mr. Park is aware of this. He will want to show his gratitude. I told you I don't want. With respect, Miss Wells, what you want may not be relevant. In our world, debts must be acknowledged. Especially debts like this. The SUV turned through massive iron gates onto a private drive. Cynthia's breath caught as the house came into view. No, not a house, a mansion. Modern architecture, all glass and stone, sprawling across the hillside with views that probably cost more than she'd make in 10 lifetimes. This was where June lived. This palace that looked like something from a magazine about how the other half lived. Before they'd even fully stopped, the front doors burst open and a man emerged, moving fast despite his obvious attempt at control. Cynthia's first thought was that she'd been expecting someone older, someone harder. What she got instead was a man who couldn't have been more than 35, tall and broad-shouldered in an expensive black suit, with sharp features and dark eyes that swept the vehicles with barely contained desperation. This was Park Minho, June's father, and he looked like he'd aged a decade in the hours his son had been missing. Uncle Min opened the door. The man's eyes found his son still sleeping against Cynthia's side, and something in his carefully controlled expression shattered. Not broke. This was clearly someone who'd learned to break in private, but cracked enough that she could see the fear and relief and love warring beneath his composed exterior. Jun Woo, he breathed, reaching in with hands that trembled slightly. Cynthia gently shook the boy awake. June, we're here. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Then he saw his father, and everything else disappeared. Appa! He launched himself out of the SUV and into his father's arms with the kind of desperate relief that made Cynthia's chest tight. Park Minho caught him, held him like he was the most precious thing in the world, which she supposed he was. The man buried his face in his son's hair, and she could see his whole body shaking, could see him fighting to maintain control and losing the battle. It was such a raw, private moment that she looked away, uncomfortable witnessing this powerful man's vulnerability. But she couldn't unhear the broken sound he made, couldn't unsee the tears that slipped down his face despite his obvious attempts to hold them back. Appa, I was so scared, June was saying, his words muffled against his father's shoulder. The bad men took me, and it was dark, and I couldn't find you, and... Sure, I've got you. I've got you now. You're safe. Miho's voice was rough, thick with emotion. He pulled back just enough to look at his son, his hands gentle as they checked for injuries with the practiced care of someone who'd done this before. Did they hurt you? Tell me the truth. No, I got away before they could do the bad things. And then Cynthia saved me. June turned in his father's arms to point at her. She beat up the bad men who tried to take me back. She was so strong and brave, and... Miho's eyes lifted to meet Cynthia's for the first time, and she felt the impact of that gaze like a physical force. He was looking at her the way someone might look at a miracle they didn't quite believe was real. His eyes swept over her, cataloging, assessing, trying to understand what kind of person fights armed men for a stranger's child. You saved my son. His voice was deeper in person, rougher, carrying an intensity that made her want to step back even though he hadn't moved. She climbed out of the SUV, suddenly very aware of her cheap clothes and messy hair and how out of place she was in this world of mansions and private security. I did what anyone would. No. The word was sharp, definitive, cutting through her automatic deflection. He moved closer, still holding June, his eyes never leaving hers. Not anyone. Most people would have called the police and walked away. You fought for him, protected him, brought him to your home. His jaw tightened, emotion flickering across his face before he locked it down. Uncle Min told me what you did. How you fought off 2 armed men. How you... He seemed unable to finish the sentence, undone by gratitude too large for words. They were hurting him, Cynthia said simply. Because what else was there to say? I couldn't let them. Something shifted in Miho's expression, recognition, maybe, or understanding. Like he'd seen something in her that resonated with something in himself. I mean you. Park Minho. He said it like she should know the name, like it carried weight. She didn't know it, but she understood what Uncle Min had been too diplomatic to say directly. This was someone important, someone powerful, someone dangerous. Cynthia Wells. Cynthia, he repeated like he was memorizing it, filing it away in some critical mental category. Thank you doesn't seem... He paused, searching for words. Adequate. For what you've done. It's enough, she said quickly, wanting to end this before he offered her money or rewards she didn't want and couldn't accept. I just wanted to make sure he was safe. He is now, so I should. Appa, can Cynthia come inside? June interrupted, his small hand reaching for hers, even from his father's arms. Please? I want to show her my room. Miho's eyes moved between his son and Cynthia, and she saw him struggling with something. Control, maybe, or the overwhelming need to grant his child anything he asked for after nearly losing him. If she wishes to, he said carefully, then looked at Cynthia. Please, at least let me offer you breakfast. And his voice dropped, became almost vulnerable. I would like to hear what happened. From you. If you're willing. She should say no. Should walk away from this mansion and these dangerous people and the intensity in Park Minho's eyes that suggested he saw her as something more than a good Samaritan who'd happened to be in the right place. But June was looking at her with such hope, such trust, and Minho was looking at her with such careful desperation to understand what had happened to his son. Okay, she heard herself agree. Breakfast sounds good. The relief that crossed Minho's face was almost painful to witness. He shifted June to one hip, the casual ease of someone who'd been a father for 6 years, and gestured toward the house. Please. Cynthia followed them inside, trying not to gape at the interior that was somehow even more impressive than the exterior. But it was the small touches that caught her attention. Toys near a doorway, a coloring book left open on a table, a small jacket hung at child height. Evidence that despite the overwhelming wealth, this was actually a home where a child lived. They passed through several rooms before reaching a kitchen that overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. An older woman was there, and when she saw June, she burst into tears. June Woo. Oh, thank God. She rushed over, adding her embrace to Miho's, her hands shaking as they touched the boy's face like she needed to confirm he was real. We were so worried. This is Mrs. Lee, Minho explained, his voice softening. She's been with us since Junwoo was born. She's family. The warmth in his voice when he said family surprised Cynthia. She'd been building a picture in her mind of Park Minho, cold crime lord, ruthless businessman, the kind of man who saw people as assets or threats. But the way he spoke to Mrs. Lee, the genuine affection in his tone, suggested something more complicated. Mrs. Lee turned to Cynthia with tears still streaming down her face. You saved him? You brought our Junwoo back. I just helped. Thank you. Mrs. Lee grabbed her hands, squeezed with surprising strength. Thank you, thank you. He's the light of this house. Without him, she couldn't finish, dissolving into fresh tears. Minho placed a gentle hand on the older woman's shoulder. Mrs. Lee, perhaps you can make breakfast? I think we're all hungry. It was clearly both a request and a dismissal, giving the woman something to do with her overwhelming emotion. She nodded, wiping her eyes, already moving toward the stove with the focused energy of someone channeling grief into action. Please sit, Minho said, gesturing to the breakfast bar. June had finally loosened his grip on his father's neck, sliding down to stand on his own feet, but keeping one hand firmly wrapped around Minho's sleeve. Cynthia sat, hyper-aware of the luxury surrounding her, of Uncle Min standing quietly in the doorway, of the way Miho's eyes kept tracking to his son like he needed constant visual confirmation that June was really there, really safe. "Tell me what happened," Miho said, his voice dropping into something harder, more controlled. "Everything." So she did. She told him about June stumbling into the cafe at nearly 3 a.m., terrified and exhausted. About feeding him, trying to get information. About the two men who'd walked in calling June merchandise, making threats, pulling weapons. With each detail, Miho's face grew darker. His hands clenched on the counter, knuckles white with suppressed rage. But he didn't interrupt. He just listened with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing every word. "They had a knife," Cynthia continued, watching emotions flicker across his face. "One of them came at me. I fought back, using everything I learned from." She hesitated, not sure how much to share. "From," Miho prompted, leaning forward slightly. "From years of martial arts training. I started when I was 13. Taekwondo, mostly some Hapkido. My instructor taught me to protect myself, to never be helpless again." The words came out before she could stop them, revealing more than she'd intended. Understanding flickered in Miho's eyes. "Again," he repeated softly. "Something happened to you. Something that made you learn to fight." Cynthia's throat tightened. She didn't want to share this, didn't want to expose old wounds to this stranger. But June was sitting beside her now, and Miho was looking at her with such careful attention, and somehow the truth spilled out. "My brother, David, when I was 8, someone took him from the orphanage where we lived. I tried to stop them, but I was small, weak, and helpless. I never saw him again." She forced the words past the lump in her throat. "After that, I promised myself I'd never be helpless again, that if I ever got another chance to save someone." She looked at June. "I got that chance last night." Silence fell over the kitchen. Even Mrs. Lee had stopped cooking, stood frozen with a spatula in her hand. June was staring at her with wide eyes, and Miho looked like she'd reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and the genuine sorrow in his voice surprised her. "About your brother. That kind of loss." He glanced at June, and she could see him imagining it, imagining losing his son permanently. The thought physically pained him. "I can't imagine. It was a long time ago. Trauma doesn't care about time," Miho said, with the certainty of someone who carried his own scars. "It lives in us, shapes us. What happened to you? It made you into someone who could save my son. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but..." He paused, struggling with emotion. "I am grateful. I'm so grateful." Shortly afterwards, Mrs. Lee brought out food, a spread that seemed excessive for breakfast but somehow felt right for the emotional weight of the moment. Kimchi fried rice, banchan, grilled fish, fresh fruit. June immediately dug in with the appetite of a child who felt safe enough to eat. And watching him, Cynthia felt an ease in her chest. He was okay. He was home. She'd actually done it, had saved someone when it mattered. "What will you do about the men who took him?" she asked Miho quietly. His expression went cold and dangerous. "They're already being dealt with. The Jade Dragons made a mistake targeting my family. They won't make another." The way he said it left no doubt about what being dealt with meant. "And the two men from the cafe? We found them at a hospital. Broken bones, concussion, second-degree burns." His eyes met hers with something that might have been respect. "You did serious damage. They were going to hurt him. I know, and I'm glad you stopped them." He paused. "You could have called the police. Let them handle it. Why didn't you?" Cynthia thought about how to answer that, about the complicated tangle of reasons that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with old wounds and broken systems, and the memory of authorities who'd promised to find David and failed. Because June was terrified of phone calls. He said the kidnappers would know. And because... She hesitated. "Because I've seen how the system treats lost kids." He needed more than that. Miho studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he was seeing right through her carefully constructed walls to the scared girl underneath. "Thank you," he said again, "for trusting your instincts, for protecting him." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a business card. Simple, Elegant, just a name and number. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Cynthia took the card, knowing she should refuse, knowing acceptance meant acknowledging a connection she didn't want. I don't need anything. Perhaps not now, but keep it anyway. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You saved my son's life. That creates a debt I can never fully repay. The least you can do is let me try. I didn't do it for a debt. I know. His expression softened. That's exactly why I want to repay it. You're not like the people in my world, Cynthia. You don't want anything from me. That makes you. He searched for the word. Rare. The weight of his attention felt too heavy, too complicated. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her untouched juice. I should go. You have your son back. That's what matters. Jun's head snapped up from his food. No, you can't go yet. You promised you'd stay. Junwoo, Miho said gently, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Cynthia has her own life. She can't stay here forever. But she could stay today, right? Jun's eyes filled with tears, his voice climbing with panic. Please, Appa. Please let her stay. Just today. I need. He couldn't finish, but the desperation in his face said everything. This child had been traumatized, kidnapped, and held captive. Now that he felt safe, he was terrified of losing the person who'd made him feel that way. It wasn't logical, wasn't fair to either of them, but trauma never was. Miho looked at her, and she saw him struggling, wanting to respect her boundaries, wanting to let her leave, but unable to deny his son anything after nearly losing him. Just for a little while, Cynthia heard herself say, unable to resist the plea in both their faces. A few hours. Relief flooded Jun's expression. Even Miho's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained troubled. They spent the morning in careful proximity, Jun showing her his room with 6-year-old enthusiasm, Miho hovering nearby, never quite letting his son out of sight. The boy's room was enormous, filled with toys and books, and all the evidence of a love child. But what struck Cynthia most was how Jun kept touching things, his bed, his stuffed animals, his toy cars, like he was reassuring himself that his world was still here, still real. Appa gave me this one when I was a baby, Jun said, holding up a worn teddy bear. Honey. He says I cried all the time until he put honey in my crib. Your father sounds like he was a good dad, even when you were tiny, Cynthia said. He's the best, Appa. Jun said it with such a simple certainty that it made her chest ache. He always protects me. Except, his face clouded. Except he couldn't stop the bad men from taking me. That wasn't his fault, Jun. But he's supposed to keep me safe. That's what Appas do. The child's logic was heartbreaking in its simplicity. From the doorway, Miho made a sound like he'd been struck. Cynthia looked up to find him gripping the doorframe, his face twisted with guilt so profound it hurt to witness. Junwoo, he said, his voice rough. He crossed the room, knelt beside his son. Listen to me. What happened? Those men taking you, that was not your fault. And it wasn't mine, though I will spend every day wishing I could have prevented it. His hands cupped his son's face with infinite gentleness. But you were so brave. You escaped. You survived. And you found Cynthia, who kept you safe until I could get to you. His eyes were wet now, tears he wasn't bothering to hide. I'm so proud of you. And I promise, I swear on everything I am, no one will ever hurt you again. Jun threw his arms around his father's neck. I love you, Appa. I love you too, big boy. More than anything in this world. Cynthia looked away, giving them privacy, but she couldn't unhear the raw emotion in Miho's voice and couldn't unsee the way he held his son like he was both the most fragile and most precious thing in existence. Eventually, Jun's exhaustion caught up with him. The adrenaline was completely gone now, leaving just a tired child who'd been through hell. He climbed onto his bed, still clutching honey, his eyes already drooping. Will you be here when I wake up? He asked Cynthia, his voice small and afraid. She glanced at Miho, uncertain. He was watching her with such careful neutrality that poorly masked what she suspected was the same hope as his son's. I'll be here, she promised, unable to do anything else. Jun's eyes closed almost immediately. Miho pulled a blanket over him, pressed a kiss to his forehead with such tenderness that Cynthia, had to look away from the intimacy of it. They left quietly, Miho pulling the door half closed. In the hallway, he sagged against the wall, suddenly looking every year of his age and more. "I thought I'd lost him," he said quietly, staring at nothing. "For 18 hours, I thought." He couldn't finish the sentence, his voice breaking. "But you didn't. He's safe. Because of you." His eyes found hers, dark and intense, and full of something she couldn't name. "You keep deflecting, keep trying to minimize what you did. But you saved my son's life, Cynthia. You fought armed men. You brought him to your home. You kept him safe when I couldn't." His hands clenched into fists. "Do you have any idea what that means to me? I just did what needed to be done." "No, you did what most people wouldn't. What most people couldn't." He pushed off the wall, moved closer, and she found herself backing up until she hit the opposite wall. He stopped just short of crowding her, but she could feel the intensity radiating off him like heat. "You're extraordinary, and whether you want to admit it or not, you've changed everything. For me. For Junwoo." His voice dropped. "For yourself, though you don't know it yet." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've entered my world now." "And my world?" He paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "My world doesn't let people go easily." A chill ran down her spine. "Is that a threat?" "No." He said it firmly, definitely. "Never. But it is a reality. The Jade Dragons know your face now. They know you interfered with their operation. And in my world, that makes you—" He struggled with the word. "Vulnerable. I can take care of myself." "I know you can. You've proven that. But there's a difference between taking care of yourself against two men in a cafe and taking care of yourself against an organization that has resources and reach." His jaw tightened. "Let me protect you. Please." "I don't need protection." "You do, even if you don't want to admit it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding through his control. "I'm not trying to control you or trap you or—" He stopped, took a breath. "I'm trying to keep you safe. Because you saved my son, yes, but also because—" He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he locked it down. "Because the thought of something happening to you, because you helped us, is unbearable." The raw honesty in his voice did something to her. Cracked something in her chest that she'd kept carefully sealed for years. "I should still go," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "Stay." Just one word, but the way he said it, like a plea, like a prayer, made it impossible to refuse. "Just for today. Let Junwoo feel safe. Let me." He paused. "Let me feel like I've done something to protect the person who protected my son." Cynthia looked at this powerful and dangerous man who was looking at her like she held something precious, and felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything Uncle Min had said earlier was coming true. She'd entered their world, and there was no clean exit. But maybe she didn't want a clean exit. Maybe for the first time in 20 years, she wanted to stay somewhere that felt like it mattered. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll stay. Just till evening." The relief that crossed Miho's face was devastating in its intensity. They went downstairs together, maintaining careful distance, both hyper-aware of the other. Uncle Min appeared, murmured something to Miho in Korean. Miho's expression darkened, then he nodded. "I need to make some calls," he told Cynthia. "Business that can't wait. Will you be all right?" She almost laughed. She'd fought off kidnappers and was sitting in a mansion with what was clearly some kind of crime boss, and he was worried about her being comfortable for 20 minutes. "I'll be fine." He hesitated, like he didn't want to leave her even for that long, then disappeared into what she assumed was an office. Uncle Min remained, standing quietly near the window. "You're wondering what you've gotten yourself into," he said after a moment. "Is it that obvious? You'd be stupid not to wonder. And you're not stupid." He turned to face her. "Mr. Park is many things. Dangerous, yes. Powerful, absolutely. But he's also a good father who loves his son more than anything. What you did for Junwoo, there's no action in the world that could repay that debt. But I don't want any repayment whatsoever. I know. That's why he'll try even harder to give it." Uncle Min's expression softened slightly. He's not used to people who don't want something from him. In his world, everyone has an angle. Everyone wants to use his power for their own gain. You're different. That makes you. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Important. To him. I barely know him. Perhaps, but he knows you saved his son. In his world, that's all that matters. Uncle Min moved toward the door, then stopped. A word of advice, Miss Wells. If you're going to walk away from this, do it now, before it gets complicated. Because if you stay, even just for today, it will get complicated very quickly. He left her with those ominous words, and Cynthia sat alone in a mansion that wasn't hers, protecting a child who wasn't hers, drawn to a man who was everything she should run from. But when Miho returned 20 minutes later and asked if she wanted to see the gardens, she said yes. When June woke up and begged her to stay for dinner, she said yes. When evening came and Miho offered to have his driver take her home, she hesitated just long enough that he saw it. "Or you could stay," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. "There are guest rooms. You be safe here." And June Woo would. He trailed off. What? Would sleep better knowing you're close. And so would I. It was the vulnerability in that admission that broke her. This powerful man, admitting he'd sleep better knowing she was under his roof, protected by his security, within reach if something went wrong. "One night," she said. "Just tonight." But even as she said it, she knew she was lying. She knew this was probably going to be more than one night, more than one day, more than one simple good deed. Uncle Min had been right. It was already complicated. What happens next will change everything. Don't miss part 2, where Cynthia discovers the dark truth about Miho's world and realizes the danger has only just begun. Like this video if you're hooked, comment your theories about what happens next, and subscribe so you don't miss the explosive conclusion. Part 2 drops soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the Jade Dragons strike back.